Wind brushes gently across the hills of Latium, where soft, golden grass ripples like waves beneath an early morning sun. The river Tiber glistens, ancient and slow, cradled between slopes that would one day become the cradle of empires. But in this moment, there is only silence, only nature. No marble yet. No legions. No law. Tonight, let us begin not with what Rome became, but with how it was dreamed, whispered into being by gods, grown in wild soil, and bathed in myth. We begin with a war long lost and a people scattered. With fire and ash, and a single survivor who carried the weight of a destroyed city across oceans. The fall of Troy had shaken the known world. The great citadel, once proud, once blessed by gods, now lay in ruin. Aeneas, a Trojan prince and son of Venus, fled the flames with his father Anchises upon his back, and his son Ascanius at his side. Through storms and shipwrecks, omens and oracles, he traveled the seas, guided by prophecy, pursued by fate. After years of wandering, he reached the shores of Italy, where the gods had promised his lineage would flourish. There he battled rivals, brokered uneasy peace, and laid the first foundations of what would become Alba Longa, a royal city nestled in the Alban hills. Generations passed, and Alba Longa's kings ruled with wisdom and strength. But power invites ambition, and ambition breeds treachery. One day, a man named Amulius seized the throne from his brother Numitor. To secure his grip on power, he banished Numitor and forced his niece, Rhea Silvia, into the service of the goddess Vesta. As a Vestal virgin, Rhea Silvia was sworn never to marry or bear children, a vow meant to ensure she would produce no heirs who could threaten Amulius. But the gods, ever watchful, wove a different story. One night, it is said, the war god Mars descended from the heavens, cloaked in shadow and desire. He visited Rhea Silvia as she slept within the sacred grove, and from that divine encounter, twin sons were born, Romulus and Remus. The birth of these boys sent tremors through Amulius' palace. A prophecy had long warned that the sons of Rhea Silvia would bring about his fall. And so, gripped by fear, the tyrant ordered the infants to be drowned in the river Tiber. The guards obeyed, placing the babies in a small, woven cradle and casting them into the rushing current. But the Tiber was swollen with spring rain and refused to swallow them. The cradle was carried gently along its winding path until it came to rest at the base of a wild fig tree, beneath the shelter of the Palatine hill. And there, fate intervened. A she-wolf, black as night and strong with milk, came to the water to drink. She heard the cries of the twins and followed the sound to the cradle. With eyes both wild and tender, she drew them close, nursing them as her own. In the darkness of her den, surrounded by fur and earth, Romulus and Remus drank not just milk, but the essence of the wild. They grew strong under the she-wolf's care, guarded by woodpeckers said to be sacred to Mars, and watched over by the spirits of the land. Eventually, a shepherd named Faustulus stumbled upon the boys while tending his flock. He had long heard whispers of strange children raised by a wolf, and now he saw it with his own eyes. 2 boys, wild yet noble, wrestling in the dust, with the wolf standing nearby, unafraid. Faustulus brought the children home to his wife, Acca Laurentia, who raised them as her sons. Romulus and Remus grew tall and bold. Their limbs carried the strength of the hills, their hearts beat with the pride of heroes. They led gangs of local shepherds in games, skirmishes, and feats of daring. Though they did not yet know it, they were already leaders. Yet, the mystery of their origins lingered like a shadow. Why had they always felt different? Why did the old women at the market bless them with strange gestures? Why did the birds follow them as they walked? One day, during a skirmish between rival shepherd groups, Remus was captured and taken before King Amulius. Romulus, furious and desperate, sought help from Faustulus. It was then that the shepherd revealed the truth: the boys were not his by blood. He told them of the she-wolf, of the cradle, of Rhea Silvia, and the royal line of Alba Longa. Fire burned in Romulus' eyes. The brothers gathered their followers, stormed the king's stronghold, and confronted Amulius. The tyrant, unprepared for the fury of fate, was overthrown and slain. Rhea Silvia was freed. Numitor, their grandfather, was restored to the throne. Alba Longa rejoiced. But Romulus and Remus, though honored, felt out of place in a palace. Their souls belonged to the wild hills and the open sky. They desired not to inherit a kingdom, but to build one. And so, they turned their gaze to the land near the place where they had been found, the Palatine Hill, and the sweeping banks of the Tiber. The ground there was sacred to them. It was where they had first been saved, where the she-wolf had kissed their foreheads with breath. It was where destiny waited. The twins set about choosing the exact location to build their new city. But as so often happens with brothers, rivalry returned. Romulus favored the Palatine Hill, Remus preferred the Aventine. Unable to agree, they sought the wisdom of the gods through augury, watching the flight of birds to divine the gods' will. At dawn, Remus claimed to see 6 vultures circling his chosen hill. Later, Romulus saw 12 vultures above his. Both claimed victory. The quarrel grew heated. Words became shouts. Pride hardened. In a moment of fury, Remus leapt across the boundary line Romulus had marked, a symbolic wall for the new city. "Thus shall it be for anyone who crosses my walls," Romulus cried. And he struck his brother down. Remus died on the earth he had hoped to rule. Romulus stood over him, shaken but resolute. Grief welled in his heart, but he did not turn away. He named the city Rome, and dedicated it to Mars and the spirits of the land. The walls were raised stone by stone. Temples were blessed. A sacred hearth was lit. And from that fire, a city was born. The foundations of the city were not just made of stone, but of memory, of sacrifice, and of myth. Romulus, now alone, carried the weight of a twin's death and a god's destiny. He stood upon the Palatine Hill and looked down at the sweeping bend of the Tiber, the 7 hills curling like protective arms around the place he had chosen. This was not just the beginning of a city. It was the dawn of a spirit, the Roman spirit, forged not in comfort, but in sorrow and will. The first trench was dug, marking the sacred boundary of Rome, the Pomerium. Into that trench, Romulus cast offerings of fruit, soil, and wine. He spoke the names of the gods, the ancestors, the spirits of the river and hill, and he swore that this city would outlast empires. Brick by brick, the city began to rise. Small huts made of timber and reeds clustered along the slope, encircled by wooden palisades. Romulus called for men of every kind to join him: exiles, wanderers, fugitives, debtors, slaves. All were welcome in the new city of Rome. A sanctuary for the outcast. A refuge for the bold. The population swelled quickly, yet one problem remained: there were no women. And without women, there would be no future. Romulus turned his gaze toward the neighboring Sabine tribes, whose daughters were strong and many. He extended invitations to a great festival in honor of Neptune, promising games, feasts, and celebration. The Sabines came in great numbers, men, women, children, unarmed and joyful. As the games began, Romulus gave a signal. The Roman men seized the Sabine women, separating them from their families. It was not a moment of glory, but one of calculated survival. The women cried, the Sabines raged, but Romulus spoke to the captured brides with solemn dignity. He promised them honor, protection, and a place as co-founders of Rome. And over time, many of the women accepted their fate, married Romans, and bore children. They became the mothers of Rome. But the Sabine men were not so easily pacified. They gathered armies and marched upon the fledgling city. At the head of the Sabines stood King Titus Tatius. The battle that followed was fierce. Blood stained the earth near the Forum. Spears clashed beneath the shadow of Jupiter. But as the war raged, the Sabine women, now Roman wives, threw themselves between the armies. They begged their fathers and brothers not to fight their husbands. They held up children born of both bloodlines and pleaded for peace. Their courage stopped the war. The Sabines and Romans united. Titus Tatius and Romulus ruled jointly, and Rome doubled in size and strength. Temples were built. Walls were strengthened. Laws were carved into wood and bronze. But even in peace, Romulus remained marked by the wild, more wolf than man, more warlord than king. He established the Senate, a council of elders to help govern the city, though ultimate power remained with him. He divided the people into curiae, formed the first Roman legions, and decreed that the city belonged not to a tribe, but to an idea. Rome would not be the possession of a family, but a thing of the people, a residential publica, though those words would not be spoken for centuries. Romulus ruled for many years. He fought battles, forged treaties, and oversaw the rituals that shaped the Roman calendar and religious life. Yet with each passing year, the legend grew larger than the man. Some whispered that he could call down lightning. Others claimed to see Mars walk beside him in battle. Birds still circled above him when he entered the forum. And in the end, Romulus did not die like a man. One day, during an assembly on the field of Mars, as a storm began to build, thunder cracked the sky, and clouds rolled down from the heavens. A whirlwind swept through the field, and when it cleared, Romulus was gone. The senators stood stunned. The crowd fell to their knees. Some said he was taken by the gods. Others whispered of conspiracy and murder. But most believed he had become divine. He was later worshipped as Quirinus, a god of the Roman state, protector of Rome's civic soul. A man born of a wolf, raised in wildness, builder of walls, and finally, a god. From this mythic beginning, Rome took its first true breath. And those centuries of history would follow, of kings and republics, Caesars and consuls, the story of Romulus remained the bedrock. In every temple column, every legion's banner, every corner of the forum, the spirit of the wolf lived on. And so the people of Rome believed that they were not just descended from kings or warriors, but from gods. From Mars, from Venus, from wolves, from survivors. Their city, they believed, had been fated by the heavens and nursed by the earth. And this belief gave them strength in conquest, resilience in crisis, and pride in every stone they laid. As night falls on this ancient world, let us return to the river bank where a cradle floated, to the cave where a she-wolf once howled. The stars above still shine upon the Palatine Hill, just as they did on that forgotten morning when a god placed two infants in the care of fate. Rome was born not in peace, but in promise. Not in comfort, but in chaos. And it was shaped not just by hands, but by myth. And tonight that myth lives on, as softly as a whisper in the Italian wind. Long after the winds swept Romulus from the earth, the stories remained, murmured by shepherds beneath olive trees, etched into tablets in the forum, and spoken in reverent tones by priests at dawn. Rome had a king no longer, but in many ways, Romulus had never truly left. His laws continued, his walls stood firm, and his myth became more than memory. In the heart of the Palatine, a small flame burned eternally, the sacred hearth of Vesta, watched over by virgin priestesses who kept Rome's spirit alive through fire and silence. Every day, offerings were made to Mars, to Jupiter, to Quirinus, the deified Romulus, for the protection and expansion of the city. But Rome, though founded by a son of Mars, was not yet the empire it would become. Its early years were fragile and uncertain, a gathering of tribes and strays, held together by tradition and terror, by ritual and rivalry. After Romulus, 6 kings would rise to the throne, each shaping the city further, each leaving behind their own mark. But none would carry the mythic weight of the founder. It was said that under Romulus, the comitia curiata, the earliest form of Roman assembly, had begun. Here, citizens gathered to witness declarations of war, to approve laws, to feel the pulse of the city's heart. But even in this sacred space, Romulus' spirit lingered, not in dominance, but in direction. His vision of Rome as a sanctuary for the bold guided every decision. It was also during his reign that the earliest Roman military traditions were born. The legions, not yet the disciplined, ironclad forces of later centuries, began as loosely organized bands of armed men, sworn to protect the city's soil. But even these rudimentary legions held to Romulus' belief that Roman blood, mixed from many tribes, would be their strength, not their shame. The early Romans saw themselves as chosen, not because of purity, but because of their chaos, their origin in survival. And so, rituals were built around this identity. The Lupercalia, a fertility festival celebrated each February, honored the cave of the she-wolf. Naked youths would run through the streets, striking onlookers with strips of goat hide to bring luck and fertility, a wild echo of the city's feral origins. In these moments, even centuries later, the Romans remembered. Not as historians, but as believers. They remembered the river and the cradle, the wolf and the twins, the hill and the wall. And more than that, they remembered that their city was not just born of men, but of gods and beasts. The Palatine Hill itself became sacred ground. Romans believed it was here, beside the cave known as the Lupercal, that Romulus and Remus had been nursed. Here, altars were built, processions marched, and poets dreamed. In these moments, even centuries later, the Romans remembered. Not as historians, but as believers. They remembered the river and the cradle, the wolf and the twins, the hill and the wall. And more than that, they remembered that their city was not just born of men, but of gods and beasts. The Palatine Hill itself became sacred ground. Romans believed it was here, beside the cave known as the Lupercal, that Romulus and Remus had been nursed. Here, altars were built, processions marched, and poets dreamed. Even emperors, in centuries to come, would trace their lineage back to this hill, not to the stone itself, but to the myth that clung to its roots like ivy. Rome's enemies mocked this origin story, a city founded by outcasts, raised by wolves? Impossible. Barbaric. But to the Romans, it was the source of their invincibility. For if you are born of struggle, if you are cradled in hardship, if your first lullaby is a wolf's howl, then no enemy can frighten you. And so, as Rome began to expand, its myth traveled too. Along roads paved in stone, through colonies planted across the Italian peninsula, on the lips of generals and governors. The name Romulus became more than a man. It became a symbol of strength, of sacrifice, of sacred will. Even in the darkest hours, Romans whispered his name like a charm. When fields burned, they remembered the firelight in the she-wolf's den. When enemies gathered, they recalled the vultures circling above the twin kings. As centuries passed, the myth of Rome's founding rippled outward, crossing generations, etched into stone, woven into banners, and recited at the opening of every festival and triumph. It was no longer just a story told by firesides, but a foundational truth, a myth with the power of law, religion, and patriotism. Even the greatest Roman writers, Livy, Virgil, Plutarch, treated the tale not as fantasy, but as sacred memory. And with each retelling, Romulus grew larger than life. In Virgil's epic, the Aeneid, the poet casts a long and noble shadow from the ruins of Troy to the future glories of Rome. Aeneas, father of Rome's bloodline, is seen carrying his aging father upon his back, a symbol of the past carried toward destiny. His son, Ascanius, becomes the link in the chain that leads to Romulus. In this divine genealogy, the founders of Rome are not mere mortals, they are part of a celestial inheritance. Descendants of Venus and Mars. Lovers of fate. Builders of empire. And so the myth was not just a tale of two brothers and a she-wolf, but a reflection of Rome's vision of itself, born of struggle, shaped by sacrifice, and ordained by the gods. Yet even as Rome transformed into a republic and later into an empire, this founding story remained the city's spiritual spine. Emperors invoked Romulus' name as they expanded their reach. Augustus, Rome's first emperor, styled himself as a second Romulus. A restorer of Rome, a man chosen by fate to renew the eternal city. He even claimed to descend from Aeneas himself. And statues of Romulus and Remus nursing from the she-wolf appeared across the empire, from Britain to Syria, Gaul to Egypt. No matter how far Roman soldiers marched, they carried with them the image of their beginning. But for all its glory, the myth also served as a caution. The tale of Romulus and Remus was one of love and violence, of unity and betrayal. It reminded Romans that their city had been born from fratricide, a wound that never truly healed. Every civil war, every political purge, every betrayal within the Senate could be traced back to that first breach of the boundary line, that first wall crossed in anger. The memory of Remus lived not as a hero, but as a question. What if mercy had prevailed? What if the city had 2 kings instead of 1? What if Rome had been founded not on death, but on peace? And so, Roman thinkers and philosophers often return to that myth as a source of reflection. A mirror held up to their nation's soul. Temples continued to rise. Roads stretched farther. Armies grew mightier. But in quiet courtyards, among faded mosaics, children still heard the story told, of 2 infants set adrift, a wolf with gentle eyes, a shepherd's home, and the fateful day when one brother raised his hand against the other. With every retelling, the myth found new life. Artists carved the twins and the she-wolf into marble and bronze. Poets penned new verses. Orators invoked Romulus' name when speaking to crowds. And still the story deepened, not diminished, with each repetition. The myth became Rome's heartbeat. And so we come full circle. Back to the banks of the Tiber. Back to the cradle bobbing gently along the water. Back to the Palatine Hill, where the wind carries the sound of a wolf's howl through the stones. Tonight that howl is soft, like a mother calling her children to sleep. The city is quiet now. The empire has long since faded. The emperors are dust. The legions silent. But Rome, the idea of Rome, endures. In books. In dreams. In ruins touched by moonlight. And in the myth of Romulus and Remus, who still live wherever stories are told and fires are lit. So close your eyes, and drift into the golden haze of antiquity. Imagine the stars above ancient Latium. Picture a small cave, warm and safe, where a wolf watches over 2 sleeping boys. Hear the rustle of fig trees. The crackle of a shepherd's fire. The murmur of a river that carries history upon its back. In that place between memory and myth, Rome is always beginning. Always rising. Always breathing.